one way that I think about this, which is what were product managers doing before, and now we call them AI product managers. I think the joke is it's a good one. I'd say I would map this out into maybe three parts. One is, obviously you're writing like product requirements to see what your product should look like. I think that is somewhat similar, although the use cases, like I said, could be different. So let's talk about that. That's number one. Number two is product managers are obviously responsible for the success of a product, right? Like, how do you define that? It's a combination of success metrics and OKRs. And so I think there's a difference there now, which is you're determining success through evals.
Welcome to Productside Stories, the podcast where we reveal the very real and raw lessons learned from product leaders and thinkers all over the world. I'm your host, Rina Alexin, CEO of Productside. Let's dive into today's episode. And today I'm joined by Digvijay Singh, the Senior Product Manager at YouTube. Digvijay is working on a team using AI and machine learning models to optimize the ad experience. He also has a data science background and has held product manager roles at Swift Financial, later acquired by PayPal, and Google. In this episode, we'll be unpacking the evolving role of AI in product management and implications on the product manager career. Welcome, Digvijay. Excited to have you.
Thank you, Rina, for the introduction. I'm glad to be here.
Well, I always like to start with your story. I mean, that's why we named this series Productside Stories. How did you end up in product management?
It's a great question. So I started my career in engineering undergrad in India. And post that, I got into data science and data science consulting initially, where I was basically advising clients in the credit card and insurance industries about machine learning models. Post that, I went to a startup called Swift Financial, where I was basically building machine learning models for digital loans for small businesses. And once I was done with that, I was like, okay, what's next? So I wanted to be able to sort of bring together my data science skill set with some of the business skills that I had learned. Got a MBA at Columbia Business School, then got into product management at Google, where I've been primarily working on machine learning and AI products, first in the Google Play Store, more recently in YouTube ads, first on ads targeting, and now much more focused on ad optimization, which is optimizing ad load, experiences on YouTube as far as ads is concerned. And would love to get into more of those pieces if that's helpful.
So for everybody that's not a premium user, are you the person trying to help advertisers make the most, like telling them when are the clicks happening, how to convert better? Is that what you're working on?
Great question. If I had a penny for everyone who starts with the premium part, I would be definitely in a different income bracket. Okay. So the way that sort of I think almost all ad systems work are, of course, there's sort of what we call demand side signals, right? So that's like more like clicks, conversions from an advertiser perspective. The part that I work on is also trying to optimize from a user perspective, right? So how many ads should you receive, on YouTube? And, if you're a more ad sensitive user versus a less ad sensitive user, how should we, bring that into our AI models and optimize accordingly? And there's sort of obviously a lot of nuances that go along the way, but you can think of like demand and supply as the most abstracted version of what we, work on the ads tech stack. And I'm on the supply side, and that's sort of what our AI models are used for, is optimizing supply, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so you help people get identified by like how many seconds can put that skip button down in your screen, right?
That's a very good guess. You're absolutely right. Right, like we're trying to figure out whether you should receive a skippable ad or non-skippable ad, and so forth.
Fascinating. Yeah. So, and this is a great start to our conversation, because it is true. One of the things that I've heard over the past few years is like everybody's all talking about AI, but the reality is that AI has been in our life for quite a while, right? So many different products had it already in the product itself, and right now I think obviously the capabilities are changing, the types of AI is changing, but it's been a reality for us, hasn't it?
Oh, for a long time. Like I've been at Google since 2019. I've been working in data science before that. I've heard the term neural networks and deep neural networks for a long time. And of course, I think that it's well documented about how large language models have come into the space and sort of certainly revolutionized big parts of our industry, like across the technology landscape. But I think the underlying technology or the underlying models beneath sort of those LLMs have been around for a long time. And I think there's like so much literature that points to that, right? Which is that, everyone at the frontier of AI today has been working on neural nets for the last 15 years. So that kind of gives you a sense that they've been around. And of course, there have been like step changes that have happened in the last few years. But a lot of the underlying technology has been around for a while.
Yeah, I know on our team, Dean Peters likes to say he's been working in AI since the 80s, right? So it's been around. And but maybe you can kind of clue us into what's different now. What is different about the PM role landscape today? That's, as you said, that there definitely is a step change right now that we're going through.
No, that's a great question again. I think maybe I'd say the way that I perceive PM roles on the AI side or across the AI stack are probably, I'd say, three broad categories. So if we start from how the AI models are used to begin with, obviously they use a lot of compute. They use a lot of the you know NVIDIA chips that everybody's talking about. So I would call those sort of more of the infra side PMs that are building out a lot of the data centers. I know a few of them, so I'm familiar with sort of the work that they do. And then the second part of the stack is more of where actually the models are built. So when you think of ChatGPT, when you think of Gemini, there are the teams that are building the foundational models and then using them for different applications. But they're mainly focused on how to make those models and the metrics associated with those models better. And then there's the third layer, which I would broadly call the application layer, right? So anyone working on using these models, even let's say some of the well-known coding tools like Cursor, a lot of the applications in the ad stack are what I would call application layer PMs. And I think those are the three broad categories of PM roles that I see in the market even today. And that's how I see those roles have evolved. Maybe a little bit of background and context is the precursor to these roles would have been, someone working in cloud, as it was known, let's say 5 years ago, is now more likely to work on infra side. So, really good friend of mine at Amazon Web Services works in cloud, but now is much more specifically focused on building out AI data centers. And you can kind of analogize a lot of the roles with what they looked like 5 years ago, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so let's actually dive a little bit deeper into this because I feel that the majority of roles when you're working with AI are on the application layer. So it's basically what can you do with AI? What are the new use cases for your customers? All of the, as you mentioned, all of the hot AI tools, they're really on the application side. So if you were a product manager, more likely you're in that case of I want to advance my career in AI. I'm going to be working on applications. What about these other two roles? Are they harder? Are they like what is? Because if I'm trying to think about it, is the infra PM more of like hardware focus, so trying to understand how to create the hardware, the underlying infrastructures to support it? What's hardest about these different roles? Because kind of understand the application one.
I think you're getting to the right question. So the way I think about this is maybe a little bit different, right? Like I said, there was a precursor to each of these roles, if that makes sense, right? Like in the infra case, there were PMs working on teams and building out the critical infrastructure that we need. As an example, for like cloud applications used in different industries. Um, and they were potentially using some of these best practices for different kinds of things. So, as an example, some of the chips that are being used for AI today were used for gaming. And so those PMs were working on building out the cloud infrastructure for gaming. Now they see a much bigger opportunity in AI. And of course, a lot of their leadership is also moving resources to those areas of AI infrastructure, and that's how they would move. And I think a lot of their underlying work, so just for infra PM specifically, zooming in on that, is somewhat similar with some modifications, right? So you're still working on data center design. You're still working on trying to figure out how to get the maximum efficiency and throughput from all the same, hardware that you have, maybe you have some new kind of chips for AI. But I think the main part that has changed is maybe you have different customers now. Earlier, your customers, just to go back to the gaming example, might have been, let's say Sony PlayStation as an example. Now your customers could be OpenAI or Anthropic, and they might have a different set of metrics that they're optimizing for. While they're related, they might be slightly different. So maybe to summarize, the way I think about this is some of the underlying, product work, product sense is similar to what it was 5 years ago. I think a lot of the customers and obviously some of the requirements and metrics would have changed. And you can apply this potentially to the model layer as well. But I certainly see that in the infra layer.
Yeah, I think what I'm trying to kind of get to, and I think you're doing it as well, is to the actual like skill changes. So if I were a PM from 5 years ago, what would I need to know now in order to work in the infra layer that I might not know before? So what is different about these jobs?
Yep. Okay. Very specifically, I think the part that you probably end up working on is earlier let's say the demand forecasting that you were doing for your customers was different, right? That you need to build out X amount of capacity and your design needs to fit this customer's requirements. That I think has changed. So now you have to spend a lot of time actually like thinking through the AI customers, sort of question, which is okay, XYZ company is trying to deploy AI agents, and we need this kind of infra for that so that it optimizes our AI agent use case very well. So those use cases have changed, is my perception. Now, has the underlying technology changed? Maybe the data center design is similar to what it was, and there are some elements that you can use from that. But I don't think at least this is my perception. I haven't worked on the infra part myself, but this is the way I see it. And I think that's why what I do see is that a lot of the PMs that were working on similar, cloud infrastructure are now working on AI cloud infrastructure. So maybe this is a good way to analogize it, right? Which is, I think in 2010 to 2012, there was this term called mobile product manager, which meant that you're now building things for the mobile era.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of pieces that you had were the same, right? Which is that, okay, you have an application on web, now you need to make it mobile. And so mobile will have like, let's say, specific areas. You need your app to be very much confined to the UI has to be for a mobile phone, whereas, on desktop, it's going to be different. But a lot of things are also similar, which is you still have like a server that you're using, you have a front end, you have a back end. So I see some things that remain similar, but some things that do change. And I think, and that's where like basically PMs have to kind of pivot a little more towards understanding the mental model of an AI customer, while obviously taking the learnings that they have from the past, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, actually, so it's funny you kind of brought it up. There is now this debate online, right? Like or I see this trend. Let's call it that. Of everyone now is an AI product manager, and then there's this debate of like, okay, well, you could put AI product manager on your resume, but realistically, you're just a product manager, right? Like all product managers should be AI product managers. Well, the counter to that of like you're just a product manager, it's similar skills. There are unique skills or unique approaches that you need to take when you're working with an AI product. Agentic is different. So maybe we talked a little bit about infra. Let's talk about the one that I think is probably more common, which is the application layer. So what is different about the role of a product manager working? Because it's not just an app, right? Like it's okay, it's that whole that's the other parallel of before it was let's build an app, and now it's let's build a chatbot. But what is different about the product manager working in that sphere?
No, so that's a good question, and I think there's again one way that I think about this, which is what were product managers doing before, and now we call them AI product managers. I think the joke is it's a good one. I'd say like I would map this out into maybe three parts. One is obviously you're writing like product requirements to see what your product should look like. I think that is somewhat similar, although the use cases, like I said, could be different. So let's talk about that. That's number one. Number two is product managers are obviously responsible for the success of a product, right? Like how do you define that? It's a combination of success metrics and OKRs. And so I think there's a difference there now, which is you're determining success through evals, right? And this is an interesting sort of interplay, right? Like I would call evals as a very specific kind of success metric for AI models that we use even in the application layer. And then I think the third part that I would sort of call out is, it's kind of related to evals, is how do you think about sort of, brand new. I would actually put it in the second category. So I think maybe for the sake of simplification, I just make it two categories, which is like product requirements, use cases, and customer journeys. We could break it out into three if you want. But I think those are the two main things that I think about. And maybe just to take a more concrete example, when we think about, use cases in the ads world, I think the one thing that LLMs are really good at is being able to identify context, which I think a lot of the past models that we're talking about, like neural networks, etc., are not good at that, right? Like, I think the analogy that is used often is LLMs are like a human being that's maybe not as smart as all human beings, but so you should reduce sort of the smartness of an average human being. That's sort of what you get with an LLM. So they're able to identify, just to take an example, what is happening in any video, right? Let's say there's a TV show. Uh, the scenes are changing, which means that there are certain characters on the screen in the first 10 minutes. In the next 10 minutes, those TV characters are gone. Just like an example of a standard TV show that lasts 30 minutes. LLMs are very good at identifying that. Past ML models, maybe not so good, right, at being able to identify those kind of changes. So I would put those in the sort of the product requirements, user journey part, which is now you can get your product with the embedded AI model to identify those specific use cases where there's a lot of context change. Then if you bring it down to success metrics, which now let's say maps to the evals, you can then write evals specifically for the user journeys that you want to identify. So the evals would be, please, focus on when the scene is changing in the video. And then, you sort of write down your eval, you kind of call out, this is what is sort of happening in the scene, and basically you can even call out more specific things if you want to call out and say, when is this character leaving the screen, or when is are certain people talking in the video. Those things can be called out pretty clearly. And that's earlier in an earlier case, you would probably write a metric, which is, okay, I want to identify every time there is a scene change in this video. Now you can actually write it out as a question and then get email for that. And so I think those are some of the areas that I see very clearly that you need to have a different skill set, and also almost a different mental model where you have to think through, almost like that you have another person on your team who's evaluating this, as opposed to just a model and a product that you were building. You have to almost think of your product as a person, and then kind of change your sort of product sense, if that makes sense.
Well, let's try to unpack that, because I don't know if it does. So essentially what you're saying is a lot of people are using chat as their like intern. Is that what you're saying? It's almost like an intern within your product.
I think that's maybe the analogy that like resonates with me most. It's basically like, if you want, like earlier we think about all our products and models as like, okay, you tell them to do something and they will sort of execute on it. Which is okay, you want to show X many ads to these users, and then you execute on that. I think now you have slightly different paradigm, just to, in the abstraction, where, basically you can think of your product as almost a person who can think, can make some judgments, and you can leverage that as a way. I mean, I think this is like exactly what all of the chatbots are doing today, right? Like they can obviously produce very coherent outputs, but they can also go on some kind of crazy rants, right?
I was about
So
to say, yeah, it's not just that you have like an intern, but it's an intern that can make mistakes as well, right?
sure, an intern that can be very productive or can go on like crazy rants that take you down a rabbit hole. I think that's certainly a risk. And I think maybe just, I often think of product managers as sort of being able to manage ambiguity, right? Like that's sort of your role. Like in the business environment, in the product environment, there is ambiguity. And in the intersection of all of these different functions, business, UX, engineering, obviously data science, you're able to kind of bring and build sort of the scaffolding that reduces some of that ambiguity. And in this new world, I think the main way that you can build that scaffolding, reduce hallucinations, reduce crazy rabbit holes that your AI product might go down, is evals. Essentially, that's sort of telling you the your maybe slightly could be crazy intern that you cannot go down this rabbit hole, right? Like this is not your goal, and this is not sort of what the product is being built for. And
Maybe
that's what does
I
it,
actually would find it helpful because we're kind of talking about AI roles, skill sets. Why don't you go and actually say, what are evals? Why are they important? And how do you think about them?
right? Maybe the simplest definition of evals that I find helpful is it's essentially telling your AI models what is ground truth, right? Like what is the the truth, or sort of the goal. So maybe two things: ground truth and the goal that they should be trying to hit with. So it's an instruction set. Maybe a simple way to say this is, if you're telling Gemini or ChatGPT that you are an expert in podcasts and you know how to evaluate podcasts very well, you should be able to remove all of the parts in this podcast that are maybe this
Filler
the
word.
yeah, or like Digvijay ranting or what have you, or something like that. And so that instruction set that you're giving the chatbot in that case is essentially a way of telling them that that's sort of their eval, right? Like you're kind of telling them what they will be evaluated on in terms of success of meeting the goal that you set out for them. And so this is why like context windows matter so much, if I understand correctly, which is like, oh, can you tell a chatbot like 2 million long eval, right? Like 2 million long context window of evals. And of course, there are different ways to do it. You can put it in the prompt. You can give it to the model separately. But that's sort of why I analogize it to success metrics, because success metric determine the outcome that you're going to go for, right? Like it makes it very, very specific and precise. You need to get 20% more of revenue or what have you. Of course, it can vary by products, but that's sort of what the goal that evals play. And typically, evals are done by humans or human raters, right? Which is basically the way to say it is, okay, this is how a smart human being would do it. This is what is often called a golden data set, right? Which is all of your smart human beings rate the same instruction, are given the same instruction set that an LLM would be given. And then they're told, now you tell us, how many rants does this podcast have? And tell us exact timestamp of the rants in the podcast. And then the LLM is told that, look, this is your golden data set with the evals, and how are you going to replicate this? So maybe the best way, I guess, is, like essentially it's like a teacher teaching a intern how to do the same task that they would have done as a smart human being. And that's the goal of evals. That's the goal of golden data sets, is being like, a teacher teaching a student. In fact, this is actually how ML models are called, right? Teacher model, student model. So this is sort of the era, like this is how humans teach LLMs, maybe to summarize.
Yeah. And so, again, the reason why I wanted you to talk about it is because, of course, on the application layer, you're leveraging a model to fulfill a requirement, a use case. So let's actually talk a little bit about the PMs working on the models themselves, because that's also quite complicated. It's different. It's obviously the Infra one, a lot more understanding use cases and the hardware components. Application layer, I think, is actually majority, like I said at the beginning, that probably the majority of PMs are going to be working there. But very interesting work is being done on the models themselves. And I will say trends show that more and more companies are going to want to develop their own models. They are developing their own local models. So that is, I guess, maybe a bigger role or probably a bigger need at certain companies. So what's unique about this role?
It's an insightful question. I do think that there's going to be just on that part of how different companies think about it. I think the general wisdom is that folks will try this, and then similar to other sort of like maybe the closest analogy is cloud, where I guess quite a few folks try to build out their own infrastructure, and then as time went on, all of the cloud infrastructure sort of accumulated in some major players. It'll be interesting to see how that pans out in the model world. I think the general wisdom there again says that everyone will sort of try and maybe potentially fail and then try again. but overall the model layer will maybe accumulate to a few companies because of two things, I think, primarily. One, the investment needed in the infra part, which we kind of talked about, right? Like, I think everybody is building out their data centers and their clusters, and I think the terms of $100 billion are thrown around at every sort of announcement that you can hear of. So I think that's one limiting factor about why it's just very expensive. Not just so, compute resources is one, but number two is the actual people, right, are also expensive. This is certainly, we were talking about this earlier, that now these models are much more complicated. There's many specific techniques that are being developed and innovations that are happening. And I think so, maybe going back to your question about what are the unique skill sets that PMs need, I think actually my sense is that I think writing evals actually applies to model layer PMs as well, right? They're kind of saying more generally for a model, what is the goal and what does success look like? For an application layer PM, it is okay, identifying a very specific use case, which is, what does this look like for podcasts or videos or ads? But then I think the model layer PM is saying this more generally for their model application, right? So they might still have a very specific use case. So let's take an example. Let's say Gemini is generating images, like, I think that have gone viral recently. I think that is going to be a specific use case. How good is your image generation? If you write evals for that, this is actually a good image generation. This is not, or like maybe potentially bad image generation, right? So that's sort of the case that remains. So the evals will continue to be important for those PMs as well. Just taking a step back, I think the one thing that I think is unique to model layer PMs is I think there's a lot of 0 to 1 work, which is that I think application layers PMs already have their, let's say, business goals, objectives, OKRs defined. I think there is a lot of like almost blue sky work that model layer PMs do. Because I think a large part of your job, if I understand correctly, as a model layer PM, is to think of like new and unique use cases that nobody else has thought of. An example would be that, folks that are working on video generation, as an example, that did not exist probably in the last 30 years. There were iterations of chatbots. There was like IBM Watson, Microsoft had Clippy, all of those things existed. But if someone was to tell me, like even 5 years ago, that you can generate like minutes of video with just a text prompt, that would have seemed absolutely like crazy, right? Like nobody would have imagined that. So I think that is one part that's unique to a model layer PM, which is you need to think of like moonshots. And I think today that technology and that tech stack exists where you can actually achieve that moonshot maybe in a few years or what have you. But I think that's sort of the unique part, which is some skill sets I think are similar, but I think some skill sets are like, okay, how do I create like a 0 to 1 product? And then of course, who are my customers going to be? Right? Like I think an obvious case in video generation is a lot of like Hollywood and media companies would certainly want to use this product. So it's almost a new customer base entirely. And your beachhead market, your product market fit for those industries looks completely different, right? Like today when I'm sitting and thinking about ads, I'm thinking about advertisers, users that are watching the ads. That doesn't change. Of course, the AI model makes a lot of the optimizations better and much more efficient. Some of the metrics look much better, but I don't have to think of completely new markets the way I think a model layer PM does. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm trying to kind of distinguish between what I think are unique parts to a model layer PM.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is there's a lot of opportunity for step change innovation at the model layer. Is that right?
That's correct. And like new industries, right? Like I think going back to the 0 to 1 case is like I think Peter Thiel calls out that you can basically invent new industries. Maybe that's a bit of a hyperbolic, but I do believe that it's more possible today in that model IPM of like inventing like new industries, inventing new products that are going to have like completely unique use cases that did not exist even a year ago. And so I think that's what I feel like is, like you said, step change functions are possible in that role. Of course, that comes with its risk.
Let me ask you a question now. So we went over these three roles. I'm going to ask you first what you think is, which one of these is more valued by the market? And I'm also going to be curious yourself as a product manager, in your product manager hat, which do you find most interesting?
I think in terms of value, there are a few factors, right? One is, where is the focus today in the, we're still early in the AI age or revolution. I think this is certainly true for any, sort of technology industry that has, been around for the last 30 years, maybe even more, that initially the gains and the focus come on the infra layer, right? Like, I think the most talked about cases, like Cisco was the company with the highest market cap between 99 and 2001. And that was because the internet was being built out. The infrastructure for the internet came from Cisco and other companies like Cisco. And so a lot of the gains accrued there, both in terms of value, but also like demand for engineers and PMs in that area. So I think that's true today too. That because we're early, a lot of the demand for PMs, engineers, other such, roles will accrue to the infra and the model layer. That's where the focus is. I think slowly you will see that sort of spread out to the application layer as well. In fact, what I would call out is as some of those new step change functions happen, the application PMs will also have to adopt those. And then you'll have some kind of combination of application plus model PM who understands both sides well enough to be able to, innovate there, and there'll be more demand for such PMs. So I think in terms of just, like I said, supply demand, I think there's more demand for model layer and infra layer PMs. And you can see some of the value accruing there as well. And I think that'll change over time. Sorry, I forgot what was the second part of the question.
The second question was you yourself. Like, which personally do you find the most interesting?
I think I'm going to admit to some FOMO right now. I do think, and I think you probably heard it in my answer as well. I think that the model layer PMs, I think, is just a very unique sort of spot right now. I think you kind of get the gains on both sides, if that makes sense. Like, you can leverage the great infrastructure that's being built out, all of the compute and the resources is given to you to go innovate. And then on the application side, you can develop new applications essentially, right? Like, you can sort of do those step change functions. I think that obviously comes with a lot of pressure, right? I think everyone that works in these AI labs right now is under constant pressure to deliver innovations at sort of, this insane rate. It's just like, what are you inventing today, right? And so there's obviously this function of that. But I am like quite interested in that sort of space. Having said that, I think there are obviously pros and cons on either side, but maybe that would be the short answer.
So, what advice would you give somebody who's looking to get involved or get a up level their career by working in the model space?
So I think maybe the one part that I called out, I think it's talked about a lot in different AI literature out there right now, which is, think of the AI model as like an intern, right? I think that's sort of a good analogy. And then how would you train that intern? And obviously that things that requires at least two steps, which is, what do you want the intern to do? You want them to go and solve a specific problem, a broader problem, and then how do you evaluate their success? And that's sort of the evals part, right? Which is think through those pieces. And for those, I think, two core skill sets. I think the first one is fairly similar to even how PMs think about key user journeys today. I think the other piece I would, so that's sort of the first thing, which is like, what are the skill sets needed? Two, I would call out just being able to play around with some of the new innovations happening in the market, right? Like the new products that are coming out, whether they're vibe coding tools, whether they are image generators, video generators. I think this is actually like one key part about product intuition that really applies to the AI products is, as you play around with the product, you start to understand what's actually happening under the hood. And you can kind of see that the more time you spend with the product, you can actually start to, of course, like, with some basic understanding, you can start to sense what's happening beneath the hood. And that, I think, has been true, for me as a PM even 6 years ago, which was, the more I play around with the product, the more I use the product, the more I'm able to build product intuition. And that remains true for AI products too, which is, you play around with the product, you spend a lot of time with it, you start to build the intuition about what's happening under the hood. And so I think that's sort of my two pieces of advice, which is how to interact with LLMs and the new models that are out there, and two, how to spend time with AI products.
Honestly, that's the best advice. There's nothing that will change or be a better investment of time than actually going and like getting your hands dirty and working with these models. So, Digvijay, thank you so much for joining me and for kind of walking through your view of the landscape of the product manager roles working within AI. How can our listeners connect with you after they hear this podcast?
So first of all, thank you, Rina, for inviting me to the podcast, and I hope new and aspiring AI PMs or just PMs will appreciate this. Feel free to reach out on my LinkedIn. I obviously try to share as much as I can about things that I'm interested in, things that I want to spend more time in. So I think that would be the best place. But yeah, that's probably the best way to reach out to me.
Wonderful. So all of you AI PMs and just PMs, that's how you can stay in touch with Digvijay. Thanks again. And thank you all for tuning into another episode of Productside Stories. If you found our conversation today valuable, don't keep it to yourself. Please share it with a friend and make sure to subscribe to Productside Stories so you don't miss a future episode.
Thank you for tuning into Productside Stories. I hope today's insights inspire you and propel your product journey forward. Remember, every challenge is a lesson waiting to be learned. And you can also visit us at productside.com for more free resources like webinars, templates, playbooks, and other product wisdom repackaged for you. I'm Rina Alexin, and until next time, keep innovating, keep leading, and keep creating stories worth sharing.